Hello and welcome to Refugee Week on the Arbury Road podcast with me, Elizabeth Donnelly. This episode, we're taking a look at the thousands of child refugees on their own in camps and sleeping rough on the streets of Europe, and how governments are responding. Throughout the pandemic, many children have been left stranded in refugee camps alone who were eligible to come to the UK to join their relatives. This is because of a UK Home Office policy change on the management of European family reunion. On the podcast today, I'm joined by Head of UK Legal at refugee organisation Safe Passage International, Jennine Walker, to discuss their recent judicial review into this policy and how Brexit will affect children still hoping to find international protection in the UK. But before I bring in Jennine, we're going to hear from Matt Saltmarsh of the UN Refugee Agency and British actress Juliet Stevenson on why Safe Passage do the work they do.
Much more can be done, particularly in the areas of unaccompanied and separated children who are hugely vulnerable and often trying to trace their families or seeking support and guardianship.
If it was your kid, if it was your city being bombed, your street on fire, your child separated from you, what would you want for it? How would you want the world to look after it?
A really poignant question from Juliet Stevenson. I'm now joined by Jennine Walker, Head of UK Legal at Safe Passage International. Jennine, thank you for joining the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, there are currently thousands of children on their own, refugee children, throughout Europe. To get some understanding of the situation, first of all, what has brought these children to Europe?
Well, many things. Most of the children who we work with come from places like Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia. Some come from other countries as well. And these children are fleeing situations of war and persecution. Many have lost both parents, and many are simply trying to find a place where they can live in safety and have a future.
Yes, and how, you mentioned some of them have lost both their parents, but how have they ended up alone? Were they traveling the whole time alone, or are they seeking someone?
Many are trying to join relatives in the UK. Most of the children who Safe Passage work with have older brothers or sisters or uncles or aunts in the UK. And many are making these long and dangerous journeys to try to join them.
Now, on the subject of family reunion, the legal routes that Safe Passage have opened up operate under EU law, under something called the Dublin III regulation, which we will discuss in a bit of detail because it was the UK's policy change on managing reunion under W3 into which you launched the judicial review. But before we come to the judicial review, to get a clearer understanding of what the family reunion process is like under Dublin III, what would be the stages of this process for, say, a child who's on their own in a Greek refugee camp who wants to join a relative that's in another EU member state?
Yes, good question. It's quite a simple process, really, or rather it was, because it doesn't apply to the UK anymore. The Dublin system is essentially an agreement between EU states about which country should be responsible for making a decision on somebody's asylum application. So let's say an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child arrives in Greece, they register their asylum claim. The Greek authorities will ask them if they have any family in any other European country. The child says that they have an older brother in the United Kingdom. The Greek authorities then have to make a request to the UK, using this example in the past, obviously, for the UK to take charge, to become responsible for that child's asylum claim. there are strict time limits within the Dublin system. The Greek authorities have to make that request within 3 months of the child claiming asylum, and then the UK authorities need to make a decision within 2 months. And the criteria are very simple. All that they need to show is that the child and the brother are related, as they claim, that they are genuinely family members, and that it's in that child's best interests to join his older brother in the UK. And if those criteria are met, then the application should be accepted, and within 6 months, Greece should arrange for the child to be transferred to the UK. They should do it as soon as possible, rather, and maximum within 6 months.
Thank you. And with an important part then of the process being proving that the sponsor and the child are related, how did the authorities go about that?
Yes, that's really a critical issue. In practice, the UK authorities check whatever evidence has been submitted with the application. So in some cases that might include documentary evidence, such as ID documents, but very often people won't have those for reasons that I can explain. The Home Office, in addition to looking at what evidence has been submitted, also tend to check their own records. They might, for example, if the family member in the UK had previously claimed asylum in the UK, they would have had an interview and they might have been asked about their family member, about their family. And if they've mentioned a sibling then that will also sort of be part. In practice, that's all the Home Office do. They ought to be doing much more, and that's one of the issues in the judicial review.
Right, so let's discuss the judicial review then. So it was into a policy change that happened, obviously, while the UK was still in the European Union. So this potentially was the last window of opportunity for children to access family reunion in the UK under EU law. And the UK, so I think for the final 8 months of being in the European Union, and the UK Home Office changed the policy in such a way that children who claimed to be eligible under this scheme didn't access family reunion and therefore were left in refugee camps throughout the pandemic. You talked about the deadlines on the part of the requesting state. You mentioned they had to sort of file the application, I think you said within 3 months. But one of the things that has been changed in, or was changed in the UK's management was the use of deadlines. How was that so detrimental to the children's applications?
Yes, that was a big change, and it was really, the consequences of it were really catastrophic, and we saw it in our casework from around March last year, in fact, because the Home Office were operating this change before they formally changed their policy, which is essentially the guidance that they give to caseworkers who make decisions, and which always has to be published. So the change was about there were two changes, but one was about the stage. If the UK refuses a request, then the sending state, so Greece, can make a request for the case to be looked at again, a reconsideration request, and that should be done within 3 weeks. And the Home Office should try to reply within 2 weeks. That's what the regulations say. And the Home Office started to refuse cases after 2 weeks without even looking at the request to reconsider. They didn't consider it at all. They said, we've tried to, but we haven't managed to. 2 weeks have now passed. This case, this child is not our responsibility. They must stay in Greece. So that's what we saw happening. And that was really catastrophic, because a very large proportion of requests were refused by the Home Office, around 50% roughly. And this, in effect, denied them the opportunity of having their case looked at again properly.
So is it correct that only the EU state where the relative is, the state that's being requested, can process this application. So if the UK rejects it and responsibility reverts to where the child is, that's the end of the opportunity for family reunion. How did the Home Office account for such a policy change if they're saying, if we ignore something for 2 weeks, it's no longer our responsibility, when they're the only people who can action the request? How did they justify making such a change?
Yes, that's a good question, and it's important to remember that one of the key overarching principles of the Dublin system, of this agreement amongst EU states, is that the best interests of the child should be a primary consideration. So in the judicial review, we were making the argument that clearly it can't be in a child's best interest to refuse a case in this way without even looking at the re-examination request. The Home Office relied on a judgment from the Court of Justice of the European Union, which was also relating to the Dublin regulations, but it didn't concern a family reunion case. It concerned a situation where somebody was being sent back to another EU state where they had previously been fingerprinted. It didn't concern a child, it didn't concern a family reunion. And in that case, the Court of Justice of the European Union said that very strict time limits apply in the Dublin system. And that is because part of the system is to try to ensure that decisions are made promptly, so that people's asylum claims are decided promptly, which of course is a good aim to have, and one that we fully agree with, but that can't be at the expense of the best interest of the child.
Yes, yeah. There's a difference between speeding up something in the interest of the claimant. If you said they had an outstanding application in another country and you want to just get the responsibility back to where they are, that makes sense, but not, as we were saying, speeding up, ending the process altogether. Human rights are frequently mentioned. I mean, you just mentioned in the best interest of the child, but with regard, sadly, to UK Home Office policy, it's frequently mentioned by human rights organisations, particularly recently with their new plan for immigration, that they are failing to fulfil obligations. Were you able to apply this in during the judicial review, that sort of the specific sort of willful disregard for human rights?
Yes and no. I don't want to get too legalistic here, but
right. Yeah.
Just in from a legal point of view, the human rights are very relevant, and the Dublin system is another sort of overarching principle is the right to family life. That's protected by Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, and obviously domestically in the Human Rights Act. So that's another consideration that runs through the veins of the whole Dublin system, that decisions have to be taken and the process has to work so that human rights are respected. In many ways, the arguments in the judicial review were a lot more simple. We were saying that the guidance that the Home Office are giving to their caseworkers was leading them to make incorrect decisions, because it didn't implement many judgments that the upper tribunal, the immigration tribunal, has given in previous Dublin cases.
This has to be absolutely devastating for both the children involved who are stuck on their own and for the families involved. Are you able to give us an idea of how many children have been affected by the policy change, and even maybe some individual stories that you could share with us?
Yes, of course, yes. Well, we found the Home Office own figures say that around 670 cases of children were refused last year, so under this policy that we were challenging. So that's and that was around 60%, 68% of all applications in that time. We did see that the Home Office rate of accepting applications increased after we started this challenge, which was very positive, but still clearly a very high number being refused. I can give one example of an Afghan child who contacted us towards the end of last year, he was homeless in Athens. He was a 16-year-old with an older brother in the UK who came to the UK under the scheme that the government introduced for people who'd worked as interpreters with the British Army. So his older brother is settled in the UK. We assisted the child to access legal assistance in Greece, to get into a shelter. And we just managed to get the Greek authorities to submit the request in time before the Brexit deadline, which was quite a challenge. But unfortunately, it was refused by the Home Office, again on the common grounds that they didn't accept that that they were brothers. This child didn't have any identity documents because he'd left Afghanistan in a rush and didn't have an ID document. And one of the key reasons why this decision was wrong is that the Home Office didn't even give the family the opportunity to address this concern, to get a DNA test, for example, before making a decision to refuse the case. Shortly after the refusal, we did obtain a DNA report which did confirm that they are brothers, but still the Home Office didn't accept the case, and now it has been necessary to issue judicial review proceedings in that individual case, and we're still waiting for an outcome, which I'm quite confident will be positive, but obviously that's only after legal proceedings, which not everybody has access to. That's a very big issue, that children don't have access to legal support.
Of course, and obviously a huge ordeal for the children involved. So now the UK has left the EU and therefore withdrawn from the Dublin III regulation. What UK rules are there what processes are there for family reunion now Brexit has happened?
Yes, well, all there is now are the UK's own immigration rules. They're clearly very different in purpose to the Dublin system. It's not about where should a child's asylum claim in Europe be decided. The immigration rules are the rules that the UK domestically enacts to decide who can join who can who can enter the United Kingdom lawfully. And these rules do have some provisions for refugees, but they are very, very limited, much more restrictive and harsh compared to the very simple, straightforward criteria that existed under the Dublin regulation. So looking at the caseload that we've assisted over the last few years, we can say that around 95% of the people who we have helped will not have a straightforward option under the immigration rules.
So children who are eligible to come to the UK, 95% of them 95%. Wouldn't be able to come with the new rules. Thinking back to one thing of the Greek refugee camps, when we hear about there are thousands of children there on their own, what about the children who don't have relatives in EU member states? What are their options for reaching safety?
There are some relocation schemes. The UK hasn't offered any relocation in recent years to children either in Greece or anywhere else in the EU, camps in France as well. Other European countries last year did accept, Germany, Portugal, for instance, they accepted hundreds of children from camps in Greece, sometimes in response, for example, to the terrible fire in Moria camp on Lesbos. The UK didn't. In the past, there was the DUB scheme, which Safe Passage campaigned for in 2016. And that was a scheme for children who didn't have family in the UK and who were able to relocate here safely. That scheme helped 480 children from Greece, France and Italy. But it was closed by the government last year, and there aren't any commitments to enact anything similar in the future.
For any of our followers who aren't familiar, and this is nothing to do with Dublin, this is named after, because I was looking in the Dublin 3 regulation, but there's the Dubs scheme. It's named after Lord Alf Dubs, a Labour politician who himself was a child refugee who came to Britain in 1939, I believe, aged 6, on the Kindertransport, which was a scheme to save children, I think mainly Jewish children, from Nazi-occupied countries. And he's a very strong vocal advocate for the protection of child refugees. I noticed there was another campaign you worked with him on more recently, something called the Pandemic Rescue Flight, and that was something you both campaigned for. And this was at the height of the pandemic, when flights were suspended. You were able to get a flight that took vulnerable refugees out of Greece to Britain. How did you achieve that?
Yes, well, through a lot of a lot of hard work. I mean, the situation was absolutely terrible. We had children who had been waiting in camps on the Greek islands. I had a Syrian child on Samos, where the conditions are even worse than Lesbos, and he had been waiting for months and months. His case had been accepted, and he had a flight booked by the Greek authorities to come to the UK to join his older brother, recognised as a refugee and who was studying here at university. And the flight was due to be on the 31st of March. And obviously the pandemic hit, the flight was cancelled, despite the fact that it would have been possible. And he was absolutely devastated. And then in the weeks after that, we had more and more children in exactly the same situation. And it just seemed that everything stopped, when at that time it was clearly possible for flights to operate and for people to be brought here safely. So it was a combination of campaigning in Greece and in the UK. Lord Dubs was absolutely invaluable in working with contacts that he has, and it was really through those efforts that this special flight was possible. It was a very close cooperation between the Greek and the UK authorities, and 52 people arrived in May last year.
Yeah, so it's great to hear of a success story and of the many other campaigns that you've worked so hard on. From your experience then in dealing with policies, if we focus on family reunion was in the UK and sort of in Europe as a whole, what would you then suggest are the most needed policy changes in the current asylum systems?
Well, it's really urgent that the UK government reforms the rules that we have so that refugee families can reunite safely and easily. The current rules are very harsh and restrictive and keep families apart. So that's really number one priority. And without those safe routes, then children will continue to make very dangerous journeys, sometimes life-threatening journeys, to reach the UK.
Well, thank you for sharing all of this with us and for joining the podcast today. I will mention before we end that at the moment, Safe Passage has an open letter to the UK Home Secretary, Priti Patel, asking her to reconsider recent immigration policies, in particular to this new plan. Are you able to tell us a little bit about the content of this letter?
Yes, well, it's in response to the new plan for immigration, which is really devastating. The government is proposing to introduce a two-tier system whereby refugees who enter the UK spontaneously or through irregular means, which many are forced to because of the absolute lack of any safe routes, would not be entitled to full protection status and would not be able to bring family members to join them. So this letter addresses that and addresses the changes that we say need to be made to the current rules, which are too harsh and restrictive to enable the children who we help to be able to join their older siblings and uncles and aunts at least as easily as they were able to under the Dublin system.
Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. On behalf of Arbury Road, we wish you every success when the verdict comes out for the judicial review. And thank you for coming to speak to us.
Thank you very much.
And for everyone tuning in at home, you can find out more about the work that Safe Passage do on their website, safepassage.org.uk. And we'd love it if you join in with this conversation. So please do comment below what's happening in your country. How are governments treating asylum seekers? Are they, for example, eligible for vaccinations where you live? We'd love to know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. So do follow us on social media. You can find out more about our Refugee Week events at arburyroad.com. See you soon.
As Diana Nyari said, it is the obligation of every person
born in a safe room
to open the door when someone in danger knocks.